from The Will to Believe, the essay in The Will to Believe and Other Essays, the book by William James. And now, after all this introduction, let us go straight at our question. I have said and now repeat it that not only as a matter of fact do we find our passional nature influencing us in our opinions, but that there are some options between opinions in which this influence must be regarded both as an inevitable and as a lawful determinant of our choice. Not every decision we make between believing something and not believing it is a decision based on pure logic and evidence alone. And in some cases, that is entirely appropriate. Wherever the option between losing truth and gaining it is not momentous, we can throw the chance of gaining truth away and at any rate save ourselves from any chance of believing falsehood by not making up our minds at all till objective evidence has come. Now, in many cases, it's entirely inappropriate to believe based on something other than evidence. In many cases, the human responsibility to avoid error as much as possible requires us to suspend judgment, to have no opinion on a question till the evidence has come in. In scientific questions, this is almost always the case, and even in human affairs in general, the need of acting is seldom so urgent that a false belief to act on is better than no belief at all, etc. In our dealings with objective nature, we obviously are recorders, not makers of the truth, and decisions for the mere sake of deciding promptly and getting on to the next business would be wholly out of place. Throughout the breadth of physical nature, facts are what they are, quite independently of us, and seldom is there any such hurry about them that the risks of being duped by believing a premature theory need be faced. The attitude of skeptical balance is therefore the absolutely wise one if we would escape mistakes. We have a responsibility to avoid mistakes, to believe falsehoods as rarely as possible. And one very effective way of doing that is to not believe until the evidence has come in. Don't have any opinion on a question until the evidence has come in, thereby avoiding error. That is the right thing to do in many cases. But in some cases, there is an urgent need to act that will not allow us to wait until all the evidence has come in. Are there not somewhere forced options in our speculative questions, and can we, as men or as people who may be interested at least as much in positively gaining truth as in merely escaping dupery, always wait with impunity till the coercive evidence shall have arrived? Are there not some questions where we have some responsibility to decide before the evidence comes in, because there's some urgent need to decide, because perhaps there's some urgent need to act, some need to act that requires us to come to some working conclusion as to what we believe about what we're acting on, what we believe about life. Some question about what we believe about life that we have to decide on before all the evidence has come in? Yes, of course there are. Moral questions immediately present themselves as questions whose solution cannot wait for sensible proof. A moral question is a question not of what sensibly exists, but of what is good, or would be good if it did exist. Science can tell us what exists, but to compare the worths, both of what exists and of what does not exist, we must consult not science, but what Pascal calls our heart. Science studies physical fact. That's great. But moral questions are not questions about what are the physical facts in the world. Moral questions are about which facts are good, which facts are better than others, which facts should we try to achieve in the future. You can't get an answer to this question by just waiting for all the information about physical fact that currently exists to come in. You're going to miss your chance to act to bring about the better facts. So, morality will not wait for all the evidence to come in. We have to act now. We have to live now. We can't wait for all the evidence to come in and miss our chance to act, to live based on what we've decided is right. That's a general remark on moral questions. Turn now from these wide questions of good to a certain class of questions of fact, questions concerning personal relations, states of mind between one man and another. Do you like me or not, for example? Whether you do or not depends in countless instances on whether I meet you halfway. I'm willing to assume that you must like me and show you trust and expectation. The previous faith on my part in your liking's existence is in such cases what makes your liking come. But if I stand aloof and refuse to budge an inch until I have objective evidence, 10 to 1 your liking never comes. Say I'm not sure, I don't have especially good evidence as to whether some coworker respects me. Well, the coworker is much more likely to respect me if I believe that he does, because that belief is exactly what will help me to treat him with respect in turn. And then, again, in turn, he'll respond. My belief that this guy respects me is likely to help bring about his respecting me. It is a belief that will create its own truth. There is no hint here in this text of abandoning the objectivity of truth. A true belief is still one that corresponds to the facts. Here the question is not whether our beliefs ought to correspond to the fact. No, the question is, are there some cases where, in order to achieve the right correspondence of belief and fact, are there some cases where, in order to achieve the right correspondence of belief and fact, instead of changing our beliefs to fit the facts, we can change the facts to fit our beliefs? At least when the evidence is not there yet. Maybe this is a better example. I've often used this example. This is a great example. What if I am trying to run a mile in, say, under 5 minutes or something like that? Say I haven't done a good mile in a long time, which in fact I haven't. And I'm trying to run a mile in 5 minutes at a very good pace. And the evidence is unclear. I'm not sure whether I can do it. Well, I am a human being. I am influenced by my passions. My ability to run a good mile is based in part on not merely my belief that that I should do my best, but also my belief as to whether I can actually do it. If I have for a goal being able to do the mile in 5 minutes, and I believe that I can do it, I'm going to be better able to do it, aren't I? If I believe that I can run a mile in under 5 minutes, I'm going to do a better job running a mile fast, maybe even under 5 minutes, than if I don't believe it. Now, as far as the evidence alone is concerned, of course, my responsibility to avoid error ought to be taken into consideration. I may not have convincing evidence, and if I went out today to a track to run a mile and see how fast I could do it and try to do it in 5 minutes, the evidence is totally unclear. I haven't done something like that in years. I don't know what the evidence points to, whether I can do it today without any kind of training towards running fast miles. If I'm just basing my belief on the evidence, I should have no opinion at all. But I have a responsibility to do what's good, right? And in order to do what's good, sometimes I have to decide whether to believe that I can do something, or some other decision as to what to believe, before the facts come in order to enable me to do what is good. A better fact is a fact where I am able to run a mile in under 5 minutes. But that fact is influenced by my behavior, and my behavior is influenced by my belief. So it's not just a case of having belief follow evidence. This is a case where I have a need to decide what to believe before I act, or as I'm acting, not just wait until the evidence comes in. And for that matter, this is a case where the belief itself might produce the fact. This is a case where the facts may be modified to fit the belief, and not just vice versa. And here it becomes clear that as far as epistemology is concerned, the priority of believing what's true is not the only priority. There's also a moral priority. We're talking about the ethics of belief. That's a phrase coming from W.K. Clifford, whom James is critiquing. But the idea that there's such a thing as an ethics of belief, Clifford and James, 100% agreement on that. The ethics of belief requires us not only to avoid error as much as possible, but in some cases to regulate our beliefs and decide whether to believe something or not based on whether it's good, not only whether it fits the evidence. Because here, the evidence may come about after I decide what to believe, and as a result of what I decide, whether I decide to believe. And if I choose to between the three options of believing I can run a mile in under 5 minutes, or I can't run a mile in under 5 minutes, or I have no idea if I can run a mile in under 5 minutes, a choice between these three options is going to affect the fact as to whether I can. So I have to decide, not based on evidence alone, but also based on which belief leads to the best results. The belief that I can do it is the one that leads to the best results. Not only with respect to whether it's true, but even if it turns out it's false, and I can only do it in under 6 minutes or something, I'll do a better job running an under 6 minute mile if I believe that I can do it in under 5. Even a false belief here might be better than the alternatives. Evidence is not the only thing. Back to his remarks on personal relations. If I believe that another human being respects me, it's more likely to be true because I believe it. And certainly it's more likely to be confirmed because I believe it. I'm not likely to notice if I just stand aloof and refuse to budge an inch until I have objective evidence. How many women's hearts are vanquished by the mere sanguine insistence of some man that they must love him? He will not consent to the hypothesis that they cannot. The desire for a certain kind of truth here brings about that special truth's existence, and so it is in innumerable cases of other sorts. A person's faith creates its own verification in some cases. And so in these cases, you can't just wait for all the evidence to come in, because you have to decide which belief likely leads to the best results before all the evidence comes in. There are then cases where a fact cannot come at all unless a preliminary faith exists in its coming, and where faith in a fact can help create the fact. That would be an insane logic which should say that faith running ahead of scientific evidence is the lowest kind of immorality into which a thinking being can fall. In truths dependent on our personal action, then, faith based on desire is certainly a lawful and possibly an indispensable thing. Faith based on what you want to believe is okay and necessary, at least if you want the right things. Maybe if you're a big jerk who only wants the wrong things, this doesn't apply. But if you have some decency, and what you desire is what you ought to desire, if you desire the best results, belief that the results you desire are the best, and that they can be brought about, will help to create the facts where they are brought about, insofar as the final state of things is under the influence of your actions, and insofar as your actions are under the influence of your beliefs. And James thinks this makes up rather a significant part of human life. Continuing, science says things are, morality says some things are better than other things, and religion says essentially two things. So how do we get to religion? From this morality stuff, first, religion says that the best things are the more eternal things, the overlapping things, the things in the universe that throw the last stone, so to speak, say the final word. The second affirmation of religion is that we are better off even now if we believe her first affirmation to be true. Now here's where James gives his main argument, and the text is divided up into sections. You'll find little Roman numerals in this edition. Probably on Gutenberg.org you'll find the same Roman numerals. I haven't checked. And this is where James makes his initial and main argument. You want to review earlier videos or earlier in the text where he talks about what it means for a decision to be a genuine option, and what it means for a decision between two beliefs to be live, forced, and momentous, or a decision between two things with respect to whether we believe or something or not to be live, forced, and momentous. And he explains that religion is a momentous option, religion is a forced option, and, well, religion is a live option to some of us who really could believe or not. So religion says essentially two things. Science says things are, morality says some things are better than other things, some facts are better than other facts, and religion says essentially two things. First, that the best things are the more eternal things, and second, that we are better off if we believe that. Even now, you don't have to wait for the afterlife for religious teachings to pertain to the benefit for which you choose to believe them. And you have a right to choose that benefit because, well, it's live, forced, it's momentous. It's live for some of us, it's forced, it's momentous for all of us. It is an option whether to believe in the proposition, the religious proposition, that the eternal things are the most important things and that we're better off even now if we believe that. The choice whether to be religious is thus a decision whether to believe this, whether to have this particular belief about what is good. And that decision is going to affect your life. It's going to affect how you live. And as a particular variety of a moral question, it's not something where you can just wait for all the evidence to come in. Skepticism, then, is not avoidance of option. It is option of a certain particular kind of risk. Better risk loss of truth than chance of error. That is your faith vetoer's exact position. To preach skepticism to us as a duty until sufficient evidence for religion be found is tantamount, therefore, to telling us, when in presence of the religious hypothesis, that to yield to our fear of its being error is wiser and better than to yield to our hope that it may be true. Again, those two sometimes related, but distinct and not always the same rules. Avoid error, believe truth. The skeptic who says, don't believe anything in religion until you've had proof of it. This person is telling you, avoiding error is the greatest thing you should be afraid of. Error is the greatest thing you should be afraid of. Avoid error at all costs. And James is telling us, with this proposition that the eternal things are the best things, and that we are better off if we believe that. We're better off even now, without having to wait for the afterlife. With that question, whether to accept that hypothesis, we have an option to believe something and gain by it. We have an option to make a better life for ourselves, a better life for others. Religion's never a strictly individual matter. It concerns how you live in the world. It concerns how you interact with the world. It concerns how you interact with others. It's a largely communal thing. It's a worldly thing. It affects how you live. You have the option in the decision whether to believe in this religious proposition that the eternal things are the best things and that we're better off by believing that. You have an option to believe something that might bring about a great benefit for yourself and for others and for the world, if you believe it. And of course, you have no absolute requirement to wait until all the evidence comes in. James thinks you can. He thinks it's okay if you're like W.K. Clifford and you're afraid of being in error, so afraid that you will risk losing any benefit that might come from this religious belief, rather than risk believing in error. But James is saying you have a right to take the risk of believing this religious proposition and getting it wrong. And you have a right because as a human being, you have a responsibility to believe truth and not only to avoid error. And you have a necessity, a responsibility forced on you by life to make a decision how to live. And you can't wait until all the evidence comes in, because this is not the kind of evidence that comes in before you have to make the necessary decisions. You have to make a decision how to live. You can't just wait for all the evidence to come in order to do that. This is a decision that life will not wait on. And not to decide whether it's true or false is to decide not to believe that it's true, and thereby avoid any risk of error, but also avoid any possible benefit of correctly believing the truth here. Now, there's another reason, and I don't want to leave this out. This is, I think of this as a secondary argument. Another reason that religion can be a rational belief. Now, to most of us, religion comes in a still further way that makes a veto on our active faith even more illogical. That is to say, another reason religion can be a rational belief, even in the absence of convincing evidence. The more perfect and more eternal aspect of the universe is represented in our religions as having personal form, etc., etc. We're talking about, according to most of the major religious theories, the idea that the ultimate reality is a person, or in Christian theology, 3 persons. The ultimate reality is personal. It's not impersonal. And that means that what we observe in human relationships might be true of the relationship with the divine. Let's rewind. In questions of personal relations, what you believe affects the relationship itself. What you believe about the relationship affects the relationship itself. And so, faith in a fact about a human being, or faith in a fact about your relationship with a human being, sometimes creates the fact. And so, you don't have a responsibility to just believe what the evidence has shown, because sometimes the evidence comes about after you decide what to believe, even as a result of your deciding what to believe. Sometimes the facts themselves come about as a result of you deciding what to believe. To take a trivial illustration, just as a man, when a company of gentlemen made no advances, asked a warrant for every concession and believed no one's word without proof, would cut himself off by such churlishness from all the social rewards that a more trusting spirit would earn. So here, One who should shut himself up in snarling logicality and try to make the gods extort his recognition willy-nilly or not get it at all might cut himself off forever from his only opportunity of making the gods' acquaintance. Do you really think that if God is a person, as our major religions say, or three persons as Christianity says, do you really think that a personal divinity is going to be completely unlike persons as we know them? How do people react if you believe nothing about them until they've given sufficient evidence for everything? Now, of course, some people are untrustworthy. Sometimes you want verification before you believe. Sure. The bank might want you to show that you're credit worthy before they give you a huge line of credit, that sort of thing. It's not always wrong to ask for evidence. But imagine this kind of person James describes: a man who in a company of gentlemen made no advances, asked a warrant for every concession, believed no one's word without proof. This is churlishness. This will cut him off from all social rewards that a more trusting spirit would earn. What if you treat God this way? Would you really expect a personal God to give you all the evidence in advance if you show no willingness to trust anything? One who should shut himself up in snarling logicality and try to make the gods extort his recognition willy-nilly or not get it at all might cut himself off forever from his only opportunity of making the gods' acquaintance. And should God give you all the evidence in advance if you treat God like you would not treat human beings? Now, applying this to the logic, a rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth, if those kinds of truths were really there, would be an irrational rule. Remember, we are talking about facts that might be affected in part by our beliefs. Facts concerning human relationships are like that, and maybe facts about relationships with God. And moreover, we are talking about facts where evidence for the fact comes about as a result of our believing it. Whether the fact itself does or not, sometimes the evidence depends on our willingness to believe it. In social relationships, your willingness to believe something brings about the fact's existence. Sometimes, and other times, brings about the evidence. Beatrice and Benedict in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, perfect example. I'm not really sure if they already secretly loved each other before anything happened, but they learned that they loved each other because they believed it. Maybe they loved each other because they believed that they loved each other, but they certainly learned of it because they believed it. Faith in that fact created the verification of the fact. So, these people who say only believe in God until if all the evidence has already come in and proven God, this rule of thinking, if, as all our major religions say, the divine is personal, is a rule of thinking which would close you off from the chance of ever knowing the truth here. And James says, a rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truths, if those kinds of truths were really there, would be an irrational rule. So it's an irrational rule that says you should always believe based on evidence alone and not believe otherwise. Thus, says William James.